Hi, I'm Mike Steven, and this is Gear Up. Today we're going to talk about suspension. We're going to get rid of some things that people think about suspension that aren't true, and then we're also going to show you how to set up your suspension properly and hopefully give you some tools to dial in your bike so that you can enjoy it more. So first off, a lot of people think that suspension is for people jumping off buildings and huge jumps and doing crazy stuff, going crazy fast, racing, all these types of things. Yes, suspension does help in these scenarios, but suspension is designed for one thing, the same thing it's designed for in your vehicle, ground control, meaning keeping your tires on the ground at all times where you can turn, where you can brake, where you can do everything you need to control the bike properly and safely. So, having said that, who doesn't need suspension? Really, one type of person doesn't need suspension. That's a person riding a road bike. A bike that's dedicated to nice, smooth pavement, you don't need suspension there. Do you need suspension to ride in the trails? No, you don't need it, but it can benefit anyone. The racer, it's going to make them faster. The guy doing big jumps, it's going to make it more comfortable. The average Joe out there, it's just going to make it safer and more comfortable for them. And why I say safer is, again, going back to that, if your wheels aren't on the ground, you can't control how fast you're going because you can't brake, nor can you control your cornering. So suspension is an integral part of your car, and it's an integral part of a mountain bike. Just having the suspension, unfortunately, doesn't make the suspension work for you. We've got all sorts of different body types. You've got anywhere from like a 90-pound rider, either a light adult or a teenager, all the way up to the Clydesdales, the above 200 crowd. So you really need to dial that suspension into your weight, because if it's not dialed into your weight, it's not going to be doing what it's supposed to do. So the first thing we're going to talk about is air suspension. Air suspension is the most common suspension. And why it's called air suspension is because it uses an air chamber to regulate how stiff the suspension is. Meaning, if the suspension's too soft, you're just going to bottom it out all the time. You're going to sit on the bike and you're just going to crush into the travel, and that suspension isn't going to be working for you. It's going to be flat by the time you add your body weight. Vice versa, if the suspension is too harsh, it's just like riding a rigid bike. And why are you adding all that extra weight of suspension? Because suspension is heavier than rigid parts if you're not going to utilize it. So how you adjust that is by air pressure. So for a rear shock, I find it's depending on the geometry and the kinematics of the rear suspension of the bicycle, it's usually in the ballpark of your weight plus about 20%. Do keep in mind that shock manufacturers do put a maximum air pressure and a minimum air pressure. You don't want to exceed those. They're quite high. For example, on this rear shock on this bike, the maximum air pressure I believe on this guy is 300 psi. So even somebody like at my weight, I weigh about 220 pounds, I put it up to about 260, 270, and I've got a very good riding suspension for what I like to do. Okay, so it's really simple to adjust the air pressure. It's simply taking off this, which is very similar to a Schrader, or it is a Schrader valve, very similar to your car. You thread the pump onto that, the gauge will then pick up how much pressure is in there. One little secret is it always takes about 5 to 7 psi to fill the gauge. So don't think your shock is losing pressure. If you set it to 200 and the next time you come back, it's like, man, it's like 192, 195. Why? It's because it's used that air pressure to fill the gauge. So always keep that in mind when you're checking and adjusting your suspension. But it's as simple as pumping it up to that, like I say, for me, 260 pounds is kind of a sweet zone for me on this bicycle. You pump it up and you do something called a Sag test. So a Sag test is talking about getting into the the travel of the bicycle. The travel of the bicycle is how much the shock moves, which is in essence how much the rear wheel travels. So when you look at sag on a bike, you've got this stanchion down here. So, and basically with that, you want to sit, if you see as I compress this, see the shock goes down? You want the shock to use 20% roughly, 20-25% of the travel of the bicycle just when you sit on it. And the reason for that is negative travel. Negative travel is, you always think about suspension absorbing over bumps. But what about when it gets to the other side of that bump? It needs to extend to grab a hold of the ground again. So that's negative travel. And that's why you want 20 to 25% sag on the bicycle. So setting your sag is the first adjustment that you'll make, and it's one of the most important adjustments that you'll make. There's other things that can dictate if you're finding that the shock is bottoming out too quickly, even at the right air pressure. The top feels good, but the bottom doesn't feel good. You can get into things like air volume reducers. So these are for a fork, but they work the same in either. You have to get the specific ones for the manufacturer, obviously, but these guys just click together and then you insert them in to reduce the air volume. And by reducing the air volume, you make the shock ramp up slightly faster. So if you picture air volume, if you take some of the air out of there and put solid stuff in there, your air volume is going to get stiffer faster. So it ramps up quicker. So for a heavier rider or a more aggressive rider, chances are you're going to throw some bottom out tokens, they're called, or they can be, they're called a bunch of things, but basically what they are is they reduce the volume in the air chamber. So that's another way that you can adjust it. And all we've talked about in the suspension right now is just simply the air pressure. A front fork has the exact same adjustment on the front of the bicycle. It's again hidden under one of these top caps. You just thread that off. Thread that off, and that Schrader valve is sitting right underneath there. Again, just put your shock pump onto the Schrader valve, thread it on, read your PSI. The one thing to note is that front suspension uses significantly less air pressure than rear in most cases. So this bike, I'm running roughly half of my body weight, maybe a little bit less, 10% less of my body weight in the front suspension. So just make sure that when you're adjusting air pressure in your suspension, you're taking a look at what the manufacturer says the high and the low is, because you don't want to be trying to put 300 pounds pressure in a front fork. You are going to cause problems. You are going to blow something up. Okay, now we've got the two phases of suspension. Suspension gets very, very, very technical, but there's two simple phases. We're going to go over that. There's the compression phase and the rebound phase. First, we'll talk about compression. So your initial shock setup with the air pressure is about the compression, meaning the compression of the shock or when the shock moves down through its travel. You can adjust with a lot of bicycles. A quick flick of this switch right here on this bicycle, if you see, here, I'll do it from this side so you can see better, but a quick adjustment there allows the rider to have what's called climb and descend mode. So you can climb, and that stiffens the shock effectively, or the compression of the shock. So the bike isn't bobbing or losing some of your energy and your effort when you're climbing. When you get to the top of the slope, it's a super awesome cruisy way down. You can flick it again into that open mode. Now the shock will behave a little bit more supple, and it'll allow the shock to engage more. So that's the compression adjustment. That's a quick adjustment on the trail. This bicycle also has a low speed compression adjustment. As you move this clockwise, it's going to firm up the slow speed compression. So what that is at the very bottom of the travel, it's another way to ramp up the stiffness of the shock at the end of the travel. So you can play with that and adjust that to what you like. I'll take a little side note here. A lot of manufacturers' bikes are finally doing some really cool things and helping you set up suspension. They get your weight, they get your height, they get your rider ability, and with that information, they tell you what pressure to set your tires at, what pressure to set your suspension at, how many clicks out you would put your rebound or your compression. So they give you these charts to allow you to set up your suspension quite professionally without having to know the feel of the bike. So check with your local bike shop and they'll help you with that or help you find those charts to start you off. We're going to continue back into compression adjustment. On the front of the bike, it's the exact same thing. Compression on a fork is, again, going to dictate you're going to have high and low speed compression on your most adjustable models. High speed compression is at the top of the travel of the bike. You want your high speed compression in most scenarios to be moving quite quickly, to absorb all those little wee bumps that you can't even see. Then you want your low speed to be taking care of ramping up at the bottom along with your air pressure and potentially your tokens or whatever you've got in your fork to allow the shock to ramp up and not feel like it bottoms out and just makes you dive over the handlebars, that it supports you as it gets deeper into the travel. So that's compression adjustment in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more that you can get into it. If you really want to nerd out on suspension, you really can. There's a lot of factors that can make some pretty big adjustments in how the bike rides. But what I'm giving you today is a basic setup that will allow you to utilize and enjoy that suspension that you've purchased. So the next thing is rebound. So what is rebound? Rebound is the extension phase of the shock. So that's when the shock kicks back or the shock returns to its regular amount of travel. So if you have too much rebound, the shock is going to ride like a pogo stick. If you have too much rebound control, the shock is going to pack up. Over small bumps, it's going to keep compressing because it doesn't have time to recover. So what you want generally with rebound, again, it depends on the trails that you're riding, it depends on your weight, depends on a few things, but you want the shock not to feel like a pogo stick, like it's trying to buck you off, but you also don't want it set slow, so slow that all those fine little bumps aren't being caught. That's a brief overview on suspension. There's a lot more you can learn about suspension. There's tons of YouTube videos. There's all sorts of stuff out there if you're interested in it. If you have questions, pop down to your local bike shop. I'm sure they'll be happy to help you with setting up your suspension and giving you some ideas. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Hi, I'm Mike Stephen and this is Gear Up. Today we're going to talk about taking a lot of the tools that you'd usually put in your camelback or put in various bags on your bike, and we're going to talk about stealthily including them onto the bicycle so that you don't have to wear a camelback and have a hot, sweaty back on those plus 30 days, that you can just have a nice cool jersey on your back and maybe a hip pack for some extra water, but you don't have to have your whole back covered with a backpack. So there's a few unique companies out there. We're going to talk a fair bit about one of the companies, but I'm going to brush over a few things first. So this right here is actually a tubeless repair kit. So to be able to put plugs in your tire. This guy is stealthily hidden, goes right inside your handlebar right there, so that the tool is always on the bicycle and you can access it at any time. This company is kind of neat because they also turned this into a bar end protector. So it's also a protector to protect the end of the handlebar so that if you have carbon bars or some nice bars, you're not going to chip them or damage them when you lay the bike down. So you can just pull this guy apart, and when it opens up, in this side you have a little knife tool to kind of clean up the edge of the tire, and if you need to trim plugs, that kind of stuff. In the other side, because obviously they come in two, one goes in each handlebar, you're going to have some plugs and a plug tool to insert the plugs. So kind of a nifty way to kind of keep the tool on your bicycle. The next one we'll go over is this guy. This guy's kind of an interesting one. And this goes in your top cap. So the top cap of the bicycle is right here. You take this piece off and you insert this tool. This tool is actually a chain breaker. So if you ever break a chain out on the trail, which is fairly common and even more common now with e-bikes because of the extra torque added from the motor, you're going to need to break your chain. Breaking a chain or cutting a chain is simply driving one of the pins out of the chain, and what you're trying to do is end up with two female links. So you want to cut it to two female links, then you'll put a master link in place of the damaged piece of chain. Just a little note, you can run your chain a little bit shorter, so if you have to pull out a few links and you can't replace them, it's not a big deal. Usually you can take 2 to 3 links out of your chain and it's not going to be a problem. The really neat thing about this tool also is if you lift this up, if you look right in there, you can see that there's a place to actually put your master link. So again, this tool stealthily goes down into your steer tube of your bicycle, and you have a chain brake and a master link with you at all times. These guys are kind of doing a multi-tool. So this is a multi-tool. It's got like all sorts of different tools on it, like Allen keys and Torx bits and just all the little multi-tool type things that you would need on a bicycle. And this one actually gets stored inside of your crank. So the crank on the bicycle is right down here, and this actually slams into that crank. Some bicycles, like this one, for example, it wouldn't work on, have a solid axle down there. But most of the non-e-bike, this is an e-bike, most of the non-e-bikes come with a big open hollow to be able to put the tool into. There's adjustable shims to be able to slam it in there. So some of these tools, you got to make sure that they will work or won't work with your bike, but most work with most. Here's another neat one. So this guy right here goes in underneath the fork here. So this right here is the bottom of the steer tube. So the steer tube runs all the way up the bike to the stem. We just talked about the chain breaker that fits in there. This right here is a pump and a CO2 cartridge system that can be stored up in the bottom here. If you look, I've got my fingers in there. There's quite a big opening there that isn't being used. So again, these companies are finding interesting ways to use the voids on your bike or the open spaces on your bike. This is one of my favorite companies coming up, and this company is a local company out of BC, so Squamish. One Up is creating some amazing products, and they're the ones that are really known for this category. This is an EDC tool. I'm going to go over the EDC tool in a little bit more detail in a second, but the EDC tool is a lot of tools packed into this little cylinder. I'll also show you where that hides on the bike. Let's start by showing you the different ways that you can store an EDC tool. So one way that you can store an EDC tool is actually inside of a pump. If you take the end cap off here, you can actually put the EDC tool directly into the pump. You can also store an EDC tool in your head tube. So again, this piece right here, if you're not using that chain brake, you can store it right into the head tube here. So you can either use this system, which actually threads into the top of your steer tube, and then the tool just plugs right in. You can pull it right out, really fast and easy. If somebody says, hey, I need my seat adjusted, whatever, you'll probably be the first person with your tool out versus digging in your camelback or digging in your waste bag. This one is designed for ones that you can't cut the threads into the steer tube. If you can't cut threads into the steer tube, then you use this system, which is more of a friction system. Okay. Now we're going to go in, and I'm going to show you on this bicycle because this bike actually has a one-up system on it. So there's the pump there. So looks like a pretty regular pump, but again, there's the EDC tool sitting in it. I'm not sure what this one's loaded with. Oh, this one does have a Tubeless Repair Kit inside. So I don't know if you can see in there. Inside of there is this kit right here. So this, you're able to repair tubeless punctures. So what that is, if some people don't know, is when you're running tubeless, you have no tube in the bicycle. You're actually running a fluid inside the tire. So it's basically the tire and the rim that's holding all the air in there. Well, if you get a puncture that's a little bit too big for the fluid to plug, you've got to use plugs, which are just like a quad or a truck tire. They plug truck tires. And what you do is you actually just force some of these strips of very soft, kind of rubbery material into the sidewall, and it plugs the hole effectively. At that point, you can choose to run it like that, or you can choose to get a new tire when you get back, but it will get you out of the bush 9 times out of 10. The other thing that comes with this little package is right there. If you see this little green tool, this green tool is a master link pliers, or a set of master link pliers. So this is designed to be able to crimp a master link onto your chain. So again, another tool added onto the bicycle in the EDC tool. So that's just the storage compartment that we've talked about. Now let's get into the actual EDC tool. So the EDC tool, you pull this open and you have a multi-tool with a ton of different tools on it. So all your Allen key sizes, a number 25 Torx bit, which is common up on the handlebars on SRAM components, or disc brakes, it's very common for. This little weird tool right here, which people go, what is that? That tool is designed, if you're using the EDC top cap system, it's designed to tighten your headset. So you use technically a cassette tool if you're at home or in a shop, but out on the trail you can use this if your headset becomes a little bit loose. So that's the tool that's there. Then hidden within this tool, again, there's a place to store a master link. So you just put the male ends into those holes and it holds the master link quite nicely there. And then here is where it starts getting kind of cool. This is a tire lever, so to be able to take off a tire if you have to put a new tube in, or say the sidewall plug didn't hold. At that point, you've got to take your valve stem out, your tubeless valve stem out, clean out most of the gook in there, and then throw a tube in there, and you're going to need a tire lever to do that. Another big component of this tool is a chain breaker. So let's find the right Allen key size. I think it's going to be this guy over here. Whoops. And this drives your chain breaker. So now you can drive the pin out of your chain, and that's your chain breaker tool. This little nut on the back side is actually a disc brake bolt. So they use it to hold the chain breaker on, but if you ever needed to, you could actually replace a disc bolt if you had to. If you look at these fine channels on here, these fine channels are all different spoke wrench sizes. So you can actually, if you get a little bit of a wow in your wheel and you know how to true it, you can actually use that tool to do a quick little on trail side true if you've really stacked it in good. The one secret with this system, or there's a few secrets I'm sure, but the one that I know of for sure is if you look, the tool has a little notch right here. Make sure that notch lines up with the little notch there. when you're putting the tool back away. So again, the tool, it's fairly simple to use. It takes a few times to get used to it, but you just seat the back end in like that. Then you flex it and it pops into place there. So again, that can go in there. In this scenario, it's got the storage compartment, which is right here, and then is put into, oh, having fun with the threads, is put into the pump there. I'm going to show you one other tool that this pump has. So you can either use this pump this way, or if you're feeling kind of tired or mosquitoes are biting the heck out of you, believe it or not, the tip of this is a CO2 inflator. So you can actually unthread this piece, take your CO2 cartridge, thread it onto there, and now you have a CO2 pump as well. So if you're feeling lazy or if you're getting bit by mosquitoes, really nice way to inflate your tire really quickly, because that's the longest portion of a tire change, is actually re-inflating the tire. With a pump, it takes, I don't know, 2-3 minutes. With this, it takes 2-3 seconds. So really fast, easy way to be able to do that. The other feature that I really like about it, and I think is really interesting, is in these spoil rotten times, bikers tend to have more than one bike. There's a mathematical equation for how many bikes you should own, and the equation is n+1, so one more than you already own. And we also believe in marriages, so we go n+1, d-1, which is one more than you own, but one less than causes a divorce. Anyways, to get back into it, a lot of times when you have more than one bike, you forget your tools on the one bike. What OneUp has over a lot of systems is the simple idea of having everything in the pump in this tool right here, and it snaps onto the frame in the pump holder right there. And the big benefit of that is that you can put a second holder on another bike, and you can just transfer this fairly expensive tool system from bike to bike to bike. But it definitely saves you looking for your tools. It's always in here, and it's easy to transfer from bike to bike. So I think that's a good overview of some of the tools that you can stash on your bike quite stealthily, and so that you always have those tools with you. Hopefully this makes your trail riding a little bit more enjoyable. It certainly has mine. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.